I made you another board, but strap in because this one's quite dense. We're going to be combining learnings from this book with learnings from this book to understand exactly how you and I are going to start reading headlines like a copywriter, so that you can start seeing through all of the stuff that they're telling you. We're going to use an example of two headlines that were written about a week apart. The first one is from events that happened in October 7th when they were thought to be true. The second one is about an event that happened at Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza about a week later. First things first, this book explains that our brain is divided up into usually two gears. First brain and second brain. We're usually in this gear. This gear, you can think of it as the kind of brain that's just having a lovely time going through life. This is the one we use to scroll on social media, and you can think of this gent as autopilot. Second brain is a gear that's more difficult to switch into, and it's a very active process to switch into this gear. We're usually quite reluctant to do it. So if you were to give him a face, it would usually be this face. He's here to think. He's here to study, he's here to learn, or she is here to learn, and this is the brain that we use to solve problems. That's why it's hard to get into this one. But the problem with first brain and us usually being here in an autopilot is that we are magically very susceptible to anything journalists and copywriters want us to know. And it makes us susceptible to understanding the world in the way they want us to understand the world, because we're not really here to solve problems in this brain. We're just here to be told what to do. As promised, let's dive into two headlines. You can pause here to read the first one, and then you can pause here to read the second one. And we're going to compare the two. The first thing to understand, as based on this book, is if you are a journalist or you are an advertiser, what you do is you front load information because you know that people lose interest throughout a piece of work. That's really it. So what that means is the important stuff journalists want you to take away from anything are the headline and the first few lines of any article. So what we're going to be looking at, according to them and according to the way we perceive information, are the bits that are the most important to do with the events that they are both talking about. First and foremost, it starts off by telling us this is a war, if you remember. So the headline told you that these were victims of this war. Instantly, I've humanized them because these are victims of the war, and I'm really thinking about what it's like to be in a war at this point. And then I start reading very emotive language about mutilated remains. That's very, very, very emotive because it's justified. We're talking about the ends of lives of victims during a war. And then we get to the most emotive, honestly, of all, where we talk about a beheaded child. Later, not true, but the article's still up and it still says eyewitness, so make of that what you will. Then we now know there was a single man and all of this violence was endured by this single man. But then we start getting into, again, very valid, because it's violent, adjectives. We start looking at this being horrendous, stomach churning, all these adjectives to describe the things that these two people endured. Then we want to know that not only did they endure them, but these injuries were inflicted. That means there was an active participant in this. And lastly, we want to humanize the people who went through this by telling you we're bringing closure to their families. What that does is it gives you images of a grieving mother. This is how you humanize someone. Now, on the other hand, I want us to look at the words that they deem to be important and the events they deem to be important when talking about an event that we can see happening in real time on our TikTok, but that doesn't say eyewitness. In fact, it gives us the opposite. It gives us feelings of doubt. And we're going to talk about exactly how. So first and foremost, this is described as a dispute. You'll remember the other one was a war. This is a dispute. So everything that happens now is just kind of a consequence of a little debacle that happened between these two parties. So the victimness is now kind of taken out. To add a little bit of doubt to what we're going to hear, they say it's claims of a fuel offer, a hospital fuel offer. But then we get mention in air quotations of babies being among 12 dead. So here you'll notice there's not an amount given to how many babies died or how many other people died or why they died or that they're victims or that they have families or that this was a horrible, horrendous event. It just says babies were among 12 people who died. We don't know how they died. No one did it. It just happened as a result of a dispute. We talk about how many litres of fuel. So we know there are 300 litres of fuel, but we don't know how many babies died. So in my mind, this is more important now than this. I'm going to give weight to the 300 litres of fuel because I know how many of them there are because they were blocked. When we start saying help a worsening situation, that's very passive language. There's no understanding of why the situation is worsening. No responsibility is given to anyone. And then we jump straight to the enemy, right? As we're supposed to understand it in the Western world. And then more doubt given by air quotations of is not enough. Then we go to talk about operate hospital generators. Here's what I want you to understand from this. If a journalist is telling you here's what's important here and here's what's important there, they want your first brain to necessarily understand this life is important, this life is inconsequential. This life just happened to pass away due to a dispute and it's nobody's fault. This life lost is catastrophic. It's absolutely catastrophic. That means this life is worthy of your sympathy, whereas this life really isn't. How do I know that to be true? It's because if I were given a brief as a copywriter and someone said to me, talk about death, but talk about it in a way that kind of hides the value of life, I would do exactly what the second one did. I wouldn't tell you how many of them died. I wouldn't tell you they had families. I wouldn't humanize them in any way. And I wouldn't use any active language. I wouldn't pass the blame on to anyone. When you combine the understandings of these two books, what you really get every time you read a headline is, okay, this is how they want us to perceive the situation. And therefore I can say with confidence that there is bias in media.